How's it going? I'm going to be teaching you guys about Flutter, which is the Google's new mobile app framework, cross-platform mobile app framework that allows you to develop iOS and Android apps together with the same code. That's pretty much what it does. You can look at the slides and you can get the GitHub from here for the code that I'm using today. Yeah. All right. So a little about me. I'm Alex Parson. I am a sophomore studying computer science, as pretty much everyone is. And so I am a backend mentor at RUMAD, and I started working with Flutter when I started developing an app for Rutgers. So I'm developing an app with Rutgers that allows prospective students to take tours of campus, like audio tours, with Flutter. And so that's how I learned this stuff. So what is Flutter? So Flutter uses a language called Dart to allow you to program cross-platform mobile apps. So you can use the same Dart code on Android and iOS to develop apps, is basically the idea. So installing Flutter, I think there was like a email that went out to everyone like following up this talk that to tell you to install it. So I'm not going to go through this, but if you're behind, you can go and use these slides and go on here. Is everyone on the same page? Oh, wait, who's installed like Android Studio and Flutter and followed these things? No? No one? Yeah, I'll write the bit. Is this the marker that I'm supposed to use, or is there a black one?
Yeah, this is darker and
okay. I don't think it matters, but all right. So you can use this and follow this tutorial to install Flutter, and you have to have Android Studio or Visual Studio installed, and it will tell you how to do everything. So Flutter is written in Dart. It's really, really similar to Java. It's like Java and maybe some nice features from other languages kind of put together. It's really focused on object-oriented programming. So all of Flutter is really based on object-oriented programming. So you need to kind of have a strong grasp on object-oriented programming to work with Flutter. Another thing about Flutter, which I should have put on a slide before, Flutter allows you to make like really good-looking apps really, really quickly. And Flutter is really focused on high development velocity, so you can go from idea to app like really, really quickly. And I'm going to kind of demonstrate that today. So Flutter is kind of made up of some key components, which is like state. The main two are state and the widget tree. So state is this idea of like data that you use to take in on an app to what your app is actually using to display information, right? So it's like the data like, posts on a social media app, images, those kinds of things are all state. And then the widget tree is how all of that state is represented. So in Flutter, we'll kind of talk about that. So in Flutter, everything is a widget. Every UI element in Flutter is a widget. And essentially, this allows you to inherit other widgets and build new widgets yourself really quickly. And all widgets have children, and it forms like a tree. So if you think about like a linked list or any tree from data structures, they have children like a left and right node or whatever. So most widgets have children that they use to display more information. So there's a bunch of different types of widgets that I'll go over, and then and that'll kind of give you some semblance of what they actually do. So and then there's this idea of stateful versus stateless widgets. So stateful widgets can change depending on what state information they have. So if you have a widget that is like a post card, so like a card for a post on your display, that would be, and you have a like button that changes colors when you tap on the post. That would be a stateful widget because the widget changes depending on what the input state of that widget is. And it can change live. So I'll show you guys all this kind of stuff in a little bit. And as I said, widgets have children. So there's a bunch of built-in widgets, and there's like this whole link here for a list of them. But essentially, there's like three main types of widgets, and the third one here kind of goes in between these two. But there are content widgets, which are things like images, texts, icons, those kinds of things. And those allow you to display data to your user, to your end user. And then there are like layout widgets, which are like things like rows and columns. So if you want to have like, something here, you know what? I'll just show you guys because it's easier to do this way. Let's see if I can pull this up. Hold on. Which way is my computer? Is it down here? Okay. So if I pull this up, hold on, my computer's lagging a lot. Where is this? All right, here we go. Oh, because this is full screen. Hold on. Sorry about this, guys. Trying to find it. So this is the app that we're going to be building later. And so in this app, it's just going to be like a random dog generating app where it like creates posts about dogs. But what you notice is like, as we scroll down here, like this dog image is in like a column with this heart icon and the like count, and then this like random piece of text here, right? So this is like what a column would look like. So it arranges objects like in sequence like that. And then you have things like rows. So this heart icon is different from this text, the image text, and that would be like a row. So you would use those things to kind of lay them out. And then everything here is in like a list view, right? So a list view is like a column, but it allows you to scroll, right? So that's kind of the idea. Yeah. So that's kind of the idea of like layout widgets versus content widgets. And then Google provides these material widgets, which is kind of like these cards and floating action buttons and all these different things that make your app look really good. And it's built into the framework. So Flutter allows you to, because it's object-oriented, extend widgets. So like here's an example of extending a stateful widget. And you can then use this to build one of those pages, for example. So you'll see later on those cards with the dogs on it was a material which was basically my own stateful widget that then had a bunch of things nested as children in it. So and then state, this is like the most important thing when building an app in Flutter. So state basically allows you to maintain continuity between different things across your app. So if you have, for example, if you're trying to maintain audio playing state, across your app, you need to know whether or not you're playing or not, right? So you can display UI tooltips and things like that. So that's kind of where state comes in. So stateful widgets can change depending on what the input state is. And Flutter allows you to really quickly, once you change one variable, change the UI across your entire app. And that's kind of the idea that Flutter is kind of built on, is this idea of having state that changes your UI. And yeah. And then there's like all sorts of different paradigms and stuff that Google has invented to do this. Like this is something that I'm not going to go over, but it's worth looking into if you really like Flutter, which is block patterning, which is like asynchronous state management, essentially. And then, so the most important thing to know is in your code, and I'll show you a bunch of code in a minute. There's this method called setState, and what setState does is let's say you have a button click, right? In the method that you use, like the onClick button method, you would call this thing called setState, which tells the UI, hey, I changed a piece of a variable somewhere in my code. Now update the UI to generate that variable, to edit the UI based on that variable change. And then there's navigation, which is just like how to navigate between pages, and I can show you guys that. And then we're going to build some apps here, and we'll talk about it. So the first example we're going to go over is number of clicks, which is the default. It's the default project when you first build a Flutter project with Android Studio. So this will give you guys like a really good just like base foundation of all the stuff I talked about, because you probably don't know what I'm talking about. But so I'm gonna, how do I mirror displays here? So we're going to mirror displays here, and then file new. So when you have Android Studio, when you create a new Flutter project, this is kind of what it is. So you click Flutter application, and this to basically you're building an application. So we're going to use that. We're going to call this tab. This one. All right. So all right, cool. So this is the default app that Flutter builds when you first create an app. So I'll show you what it does first, and then we can go into like the code. So we'll just load this up. So this is iOS, but you can also build it for Android. So up here, you'll see that there's open Android emulators and iPhone if you have a Mac. But if you plug in your Android phone into your computer, it'll also allow you to upload it to your Android phone. Okay, so this is the Flutter Demo App. And so all it does is when you press this button, it adds, right? It adds to this number. So like, how does it do that? And like, this is a really good example of like changing state. So since everything is a widget in Flutter, what happens is, hold on. So we have this homepage stateful widget. This is the whole app is in this homepage stateful widget. And can you all see this? Yeah? All right. Or does it need, no one needs it zoomed in more? All right.
Could you make it a bit bigger?
A bit bigger? All right. How's that? All right. All right. So we have this homepage widget, which is how Flutter, this is like the beginning of your widget tree. Well, the material app is the beginning of your widget tree. Well, we'll say that. So this is how you get all those fancy material design icons into your app, and like how it maintains like a set theme across your app is this material app on your first, it's like your first state widget. So it has this home parameter. So everything is in Flutter kind of looks like this, where if you were to like create like a new my widget, everything is kind of has this layout where in the constructor of each object, which you don't actually need, the new is implicit in Flutter. So unlike Java, you don't need the new. It just implicitly does that. But everything is laid out like this. So you'll have like child, like this, and then, and that's kind of how the layout is. So it's similar to Java in that it like needs the syntactically it looks very similar to Java, but there's a lot of things that it does for you, like implicit constructors, and you don't need to have strongly typed variables. So what you'll see here is the app's homepage is this my homepage object, which is defined here, its class. So it takes in this constructor, this is its constructor, it takes in a title for your app, which if we see here is Flutter Demo Homepage, which is the same as this, right? So it takes that in and produces this state thing. So there's this method create state that all stateful widgets have that needs to reference a state object, which is tied to your widget. So that's what this is. So my homepage state has this method called build, which is what's called when it's building your UI. And this object returns a widget that is your UI, is essentially what it does. So just to kind of show you what this is doing, it's calling this Scaffold here. Scaffold is like another material object that allows you to do some basic UI stuff. So it's what's creating this upper bar here and this down here, and then all of your stuff goes into this body. That's all from Scaffold. So the Scaffold has a bunch of children that it uses. Things like, I think this is called the app bar. This is a floating button, what is it called? Floating action button, that's what it's called. And those are all defined in its constructor. So like if you see here, like its body is this center widget here, which then has a child of column. Its app bar just has a title, and then its floating action button here has a bunch of different information about a floating action button. So inside the body, we can see some layout widgets in action. So it has this center widget, which basically puts everything into the center of the page. So it builds all of the UI out of the center rather than the top, right? And then column, which is just a column, pretty self-explanatory there. And the column has, instead of just one child, it has a list of children that you can expand forever if you would like. So this one has text, which all that takes in is you've pushed this button X amount of times. And then it has another child called text, which then appears beneath it, its string is underscore counter. So underscore counter is a parameter of the state object. So if we look up here, the state object has this counter variable. An underscore means it's a private variable. So instead of writing private, you just put an underscore. So essentially, this will display whatever the counter variable says, right? And then this is like some styling stuff, right? And then floating action button has an icon, has a child. Basically, onPressed is a method that you'll see up above, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then it has a tooltip, and this icon is an object. So there's this icon object that gives you a bunch of these built-in objects, icons. So like add or dot, like you can do a ton of different things. Like if you can see these, they're like different things like this. Like there's an arrow and directions and all sorts of stuff. So we'll leave add. We'll just add a different one. We'll make it a snowflake. So this will be a good example of showing you a hot reload. So hot reload is this feature of Flutter that if you just save, so you see how this icon is a plus right now? Can you all see that? If I just do Command S, it'll reload the app and immediately have the snowflake down here. So that's like, it makes it really, really quick to develop apps so you don't have to keep sending stuff to your app constantly. So this has this, so the floating action button does this method increment counter, which is up here. It's a private method, so no one else can access it. But when it's called, it calls this method setState. setState is the method I was talking about. And what setState is essentially doing is it's saying, hey, UI, I'm about to change some information about the state object. And so you should rerun the build method and figure out what's different. And so it will then update everything below it in the UI tree if you run this setState. So if you have widgets deeper down, it'll also update their state as well. And so all this one does is add to the counter. So now all this is saying is, hey counter, hey UI, I'm going to change what the counter variable is doing. So prepare to update, and then it updates it and adds more. So that's pretty much this app. And so like we'll go back to this. So the key takeaways of this. So the key takeaways is that setState allows you to change the UI without referencing a bunch of UI objects. So like in other app frameworks and like native apps, you may have to have some reference to, like a button object or to the like text object that you were going to change to be able to change it. With Flutter, all you have to do is change one variable, and then it propagates those changes across the entire app. And then UI widgets are like pretty simple. It's pretty self-explanatory based off of their name and what they do. And there's a lot of them. So the next thing is like a more serious app, but kind of silly, is dog feed. So that was the app I was showing you guys earlier. So hold on. Gotta figure out which one. So this is the one that's on GitHub. So you guys can follow along on GitHub. Let me zoom in here. All right. So let me run this. So I'm going to walk you guys through, like I have the like basic app implemented already, but I'm going to just run you guys through like a quick little, like show you how I did certain, like I'm going to rebuild one of these features. So it's got all these pictures of dogs that I pull from randomly from the internet. And so that's pretty much the idea, and it randomly generates these bark strings. So you can heart and disheart these by touching this, double tapping, like on Instagram. And so this is like this is a really good example of like how to build like some basic layouts and features. So I basically took my homepage object, and essentially what it's now doing is inside the scaffold, there's this list view. And what list view is it allows you to scroll infinitely on a set of objects. And list view has this static variable called builder that allows you to use like another function given a certain index. So like position 1 of the list, position 2 of the list, position 3, etc. Give me new widgets for every single index, right? So if you have like a list of dog posts, for example, you can take the index, match it to your dog post list, and then produce a set of widgets for it, if that makes sense. So what you would do is I have this. So I have this object called post, and this post object essentially has an image URL, a caption, a like count, if the user liked it, like a Boolean, and then it has its constructor. And then this is like a random post generating function. So essentially this is like, we're going to use this object, this data model, and we're going to use it across our app to generate UI. is the idea. So if something inside of this changes, like whether or not the current user likes that post or what the like count, if those things change, we can automatically update the UI without having to, go back and tell the UI with the set state object, essentially. So that's essentially this item builder is a Lambda function, and all it does is it returns a postcard, which is a widget object that I extended over here, and it turns and all the postcard does is in its constructor it takes in a post and then builds the UI for it. And this is kind of like the scheme that you use across all of Flutter in developing apps with Flutter. Is you have a widget and you give that widget like a data model and then display the UI based off of that data model. Is essentially how you would do like posts and things like that. Things that you have to do repeatedly like that. So I have this list posts, which is just here. It's just a list and it has a bunch of posts in it. And I being the index. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just walk you guys through like kind of how to build like a post, like the individual post widgets, right? And I'll kind of show you how you would go about doing that. So we're gonna create a new file here. Called new post. Zoom in. Is that big enough? Isn't it big enough for everyone? All right, cool. So the first thing I want to do is create a stateful widget. So this is just something I have built into my Flutter environment because I use Flutter a lot. But we'll just call it. So the first thing you have to do in a Dart file, if you're working with Flutter, is import material. So material is like the kind of underlying like set of resources that you would use to build your Flutter app, and it conforms to Google's material design. And if you look, like a lot of Google's apps use material design, and some of them are built on Flutter. Like Google Ads is built on Flutter, and there's a couple other ones that they have that are built on Flutter. So basically, a stateful widget is built up of the main widget object, this stateful widget object, and a create state method. This create state method is that instantiates this object, the new card state, and you use that across your app. So let's say, so the first thing we have to do is let the widget take in a post, right? Because we're trying to build like a post widget. So we'll create a new constructor. And we have to make sure you import your post object. So you can download all of this from the GitHub, and I'll put the GitHub back up. So if you guys want to go back and look at this stuff, import. So we import data models, and so now we can pass a post into the stateful widget here, and we can create. We can then have to pass that into the state object. So we're going to add it to the state constructor. So we're going to create a state constructor now that also is like this. So then if we pass the post into here, we now have a reference to the post object here, right? So essentially what we're going to do now is we want to think about how we want our individual cards to look, right? So the first thing is I've been talking about cards a lot. Card is an object built into material that we can use to get that nice elevated looking feel above the rest of the UI. So card. And card can have an elevation, and we can give that like 5, for example, if we want, and then it has a child, right? So now what do we need in this child, right? So if you think about how our layout looks, right? We have this dog, and then we have another element, and then another element. So a good thing to use here is column, because column will expand depending on how many elements we have, and get bigger depending on the elements. So if we have a weird image like this, that's kind of tall, versus like an image like this, which is kind of wide, the column will scale for us. So first thing I'm going to do is put a column object in here. And so column will have children, and then we can build off of this. So the first thing that we want is the image on our page. So we can look up image.network. So image.network is a way of constructing an image widget with all you need is the URL of an image from the internet. So we can then say, we can now reference the post, which has a image URL, and we can then pass that into our network image. And that's all we have to do to get that image in. So now we can then say, our next thing is a row, right? Because if you look, we need this heart next to this icon, this here. So we're going to put a row here and use this to lay out things horizontally. This also takes in children just like a column. And we can say we want an icon, right? And we also want text. So to fill in the icon takes in a bunch of different things, but what we want is some way of, is just the icon for now. So I think it's called favorite border. So this gives us this icon here, right? So, and then we can give it colors and stuff if we want, but for right now, we're not putting a color on it. And then the text is, all it does is take in a string and produce text. So we're going to put post.caption, and that should be our row. So now what we can do here is actually we can save this, and then we can, I don't know why I'm looking up that way. And then we can, instead of putting a postcard, we can put a new postcard here, and we can import it. And if we save, we now have our new, oh, I put caption. I meant to put like count. But still, you can see we have a new set of, a new widget, right? So this is not clickable or anything, and it has that little error, right? So if we go back into new postcard, we can just change this real quick to like count.toString. Save, and then if we go back to this, we now have the like count here. And then one final thing needs to be added to the columns. So we go back out to the column here, which should be, oh, this is not my app, that's why. All right, so we go back out to the column, which is here. No, I did this again. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Okay. We come back out to the column outside of the row, and we can then add text again. And we can do post.caption. And now we have the caption down here in the center. So is everyone kind of following what I'm doing? Vaguely? Yes? No? Okay, cool. So now what we can do is we can kind of clean this up a little bit, but we could also add functionality to it. So I think functionality is like the first thing we should probably do before we go cleaning up the UI, because like, see how tight this is to this and how tight this is here? This is kind of like, it doesn't look too great. So what we'll do here is we'll add some functionality first. So the first thing I want to do is change that icon, the heart icon, over to get the color and filled in, right? So to do that, instead of having this icon object here, what we can do is we can put a variable here. And inside the build method, we can define what that variable is. So we can use var, which just allows us to build, to type inference. We can say, so now that we have this, we can say if the post dot user liked it, then we want one thing. Otherwise, we want this gray outline, right? So if the user doesn't like it, they shouldn't have the gray outline, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to have another icon, icons.favorite, and then color. So colors is just a bunch of built-in colors. So you can kind of see these. And we'll just pick pink accent. So now I think I liked a bunch of pictures here, right? Oh, there's an error? Why is it? Oh, yeah, there's an error because I didn't put it back in here. So the favorite icon we can then put in here. I don't know what just happened. Give me 1 second. I don't know what I just did. So there's a bunch of great debugging stuff down here because it errored out for whatever reason. So it's saying that this is null. So I think if we just do this, it should fix it. No? All right. That's not cool. Oh, you know why? It's because I haven't actually set these to this. So it's yelling at me because you can't have null widgets in your app. So I forgot to set these things to favorite icon. And now when I set that, it should fix that. So now we can see that, well, I haven't liked anything because I restarted the app. But we'll add a little functionality here to allow that. So when we want them to double click on the image, we want that heart to turn pink, right? So to do that, there's a widget called a Gesture Detector, which you can wrap another widget with, and then it detects any gestures within that. And there's a ton of gestures that you can use. So so what we're going to do here is we're going to use Gesture Detector, this, and we're going to add to its child. We're going to add the image to its child. And then what we can do is like you can see like on tap, cancel, up, on tap, down. There's like a ton of different ones. But what we want is on double tap, and that just takes in a function like this. So you can pass like an anonymous function into it. And this can do anything you want. But we're going to use this to set state and change whether or not the user liked it. So so what we're going to do is we're going to use set state here, which then takes in another function, and then we're going to say post dot user liked equals whatever the opposite of user liked, so it toggles. So now we have the ability to double tap the image, and it changes hearts, right? But that's not all we want to do, right? So we want to be able to check to increment that text too, right? The like count. So we don't have to change anything inside of the widget for this because we're pulling that like count directly from the post object. All we have to do is change the post object. So what we can say is up here we can say if they've liked it, Then we want to decrement because they already liked it, so we're undoing a like. What is it? Why is it doing that? All right. Otherwise, we want to do that. There's a weird bug with this, with the editor right now, so I'm having issues. All right. So now if we save, what we can now see is all we're doing is changing the like count object variable, and it's incrementing and decrementing properly, right? So that's kind of the idea, right? Is as you change objects, you don't need to change UI code in any way. It's just all about that set state. And that's like the most important thing that you should take away from this, is that with Flutter, all you need to do is change the state rather than directly changing UI references. So that's kind of how you build like UIs like this, right? So you have like these content layout view widgets that then change into, that chain together with content widgets, and you can build apps. I didn't get a chance to shoot. It's kind of almost done here. And I didn't get a chance to show you guys navigation, and I didn't really have anything prepared for navigation, but I can show you guys real quick. So what we can add to the tap gesture, we can actually add to the tap gesture detector and detect like a single tap, right? So if they don't tap more than once quickly enough, we can add some functionality, and we can use this functionality to navigate between whole new pages, right? So let's say we want on tap. So what we want to do is there's this navigator class that has static methods that you can push onto the current navigator, which is like this overarching like stack. It's a big stack, essentially, data structure that has each page that you've navigated to beneath your current page, and then you can pop off of the stack to go back. So when you have like a back icon, that's what that is doing. It's pulling something off of a stack. So we have context, which is how it gets the current navigator. So there's this build context variable that's just used for different like system kind of features. And then route. So for route, like the standard route is the material page route. And that's like, this is like the default one, and there's some plugins with Flutter that like give you like special animated ones. But this is the one that you would use most of the time. And that takes in a builder, which all the builder is just a method that takes in, I think, context. Yeah, it just takes in context. And then all you have to do is return a new widget, and that's how you change between things. So if we let's say we want to return like a postcard, for example, we can just return. And all we have to do, sorry. So we have the navigator pushing onto the navigator a postcard widget, which all that will do is when you now single tap on something, it now pushes us to this. But now we can't get back. There's no way of getting back because the postcard widget doesn't have any of that nice material scaffolding, which will actually handle going back, which is navigator.pop, which I can show you here in a second. So we can actually we'll just create a scaffold here, but never do this because it looks really bad in your code. But essentially, if you put a new scaffold object here, we can return a whole new thing. So we can put a new app bar with Why is it? Oh, text. We'll just go like this. So we'll restart the app, and when we get back to dog feed and we click on a dog, now it says hello world, and it gives us this nice back button, and we can just go back to things like that. And that's pretty much how you navigate, and then you can build things and chain things off of that. And that's generally the basic gist of Flutter. I hope I didn't lose you guys. But yeah, that's pretty much it.